Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Babylon Eyes match preview, the last of the 2024-25 Premier League season. West Ham at home to Nottingham Forest. We were just saying off air, guys, it's almost like closure going to the London Stadium tomorrow, just ending the chapter of what's been an abysmal season in the Premier League. But, we're going into it quite positive. We're unbeaten in two. We now sit above both Spurs and Man United. So, silver linings in that. And yeah, a win would extend our lead on top of those even further. And we could even finish, I think, as high as 13th or 14th in the Premier League if we do win our last couple games. So, looking at it from a positive angle, this could be a good end to the season to go into the transfer window with a little bit of momentum. And yeah, as we said, a little bit of closure on this season would be great tomorrow when we go to the London Stadium. But before we get into the breakdown, guys, how are we feeling? Are we ready to end this season?
Yeah. My general health for this last 2 weeks has pretty much just I've been feeling like death for most of the week. So going to watch West Ham's last game of the season whilst feeling like this feels quite apt, to be honest, because most of this season has been quite sick, isn't it? So
Exactly.
I'm quite looking forward to it.
At least we're not in a relegation battle, so it's not going to stress you out too much. We don't really have anything to play for, but yeah, I think Forest is going to be interesting because obviously Forest are in a really weird situation where they were pretty much nailed on to be in a Champions League spot. They now find themselves in seventh, and a lot of work to do. And we obviously saw what happened last week after they failed to win in their last home game, and yeah, they've started to struggle a little bit. So they've got a little bit of pressure on themselves over this next two games. We don't have any pressure at all. The only pressure really is internal on the players and the managers to end the season positively going into the summer transfer window. So let's take a look at the season so far for both teams with 2 games left in the season. And it's quite interesting to see the Forest stats when we get to expected data. But Forest on 62 points compared to our 40. We've scored 42 goals compared to Forest 56. They've conceded 15 goals less than us with 44 compared to our 59. And we now find ourselves in 15th. We're finally off of 17th and we're up a couple spaces. And Forest have slipped down a couple places into 7th. However, when we look at the expected data, Forest have been massively overperforming this season when we look at the stats behind the scenes. So Forest's XG is at around 46.14. I mean, you compare that with the 62 points they do have. That's a huge difference. And ours is 39.86. Expected goals scored for both teams is very similar, 48.77 for West Ham, 49.02 for Forest. Expected goals conceded a lot higher for West Ham. And the expected position, probably the biggest standout statistic here, is West Ham 16th, so we're one position higher than we should be. But Forest is 14th, which is a huge difference to where they currently find themselves in. So, yeah, I'd say there's a few nuances to that data. Obviously, the way Forest play, very counter-attacking, low block, not possession-oriented at all. So naturally, you're going to create less chances, but they've been more clinical in those moments throughout the season. So how much of a difficult test is this for West Ham and Forest, I guess, going into this match on Sunday? Because, as I said, we don't really have anything to play for other than pride. Forest have a lot to play, pretty much everything to play for to try and get into those Champions League or Europa League spots. So, yeah, how much pressure is on both teams and how can we expect this match to play out? Because it's a really difficult one to call because of the stage of the season we're at.
Do you want to go on this one, Sloth, first?
Well, I think like this is where stats really can wind me up sometimes, and like this whole XG or expected finish, I think there's a major problem with it, because anyone who's watched Forest will know they've just played really well. They've utilised the quality that they have. I did a TikTok the other day, which, don't worry, doesn't have the streaming issues that we have here. About Jonathan Burkhart, and he is one of the most clinical strikers in the top 5 leagues around Europe. It's funny who's number 1. It's Chris Wood. So he is someone who is extremely good in front of goal. I know he's got his criticisms from a lot of sort of bigger clubs, I suppose, but I think he's someone who, if you give him a chance, he's more than likely going to gobble it up and put you ahead. And
especially against West Ham.
Yeah. And that's when that low block tends to come into effect, because Forest defends so well. And we mentioned the quality they had in the preview we did. Morgan Gibbs-White, Elliot Anderson. These are players who have so much ability on the ball and a good mix of athleticism as well. So I think that the idea of them being 14th after the way they've played, they went away at Anfield and they won. I think they may even still be the only team to have done that this season, in the league anyway. But it's really a tale of two tapes. I think there's one that the stats would kind of tell you, and then there's one that the eye test would give you. And yeah, I think they've been a little bit unlucky recently. I think the fact that they didn't quite strengthen in the way that they would have wanted to in January has come back to haunt them, something that we have done time and time again. But I think you have to kind of say that from a West Ham perspective, there were people talking about us finishing maybe around mid-table when Lopetegui came in, and that would be a decent season. And it's really, it could well end up being that we finish 12th, 13th, whatever it might be. And there are people who go, oh, it's been a disaster, or it's obviously not been a good season. But I think from where we were under Lopetegui, it ends up sort of being a not terrible turnaround.
Yeah, I think when we go back to Forest just a second, they had such a fantastic start, and not only have they been excellent in the Premier League, they got to the semi-final of the FA Cup, very close to getting to the final. Man City knocking them out at Wembley, so not a difficult not an easy opposition there. And yeah, as you say, their league form has been fantastic up until, I would say, the last couple months where they've started to wobble a little bit. And I think there's contributing factors to both of those: the size of the squad, also the experience of these players. They probably wouldn't have anticipated to have this type of pressure in this season. The expectation now for them to go and get Champions League football is crazy, considering that the start of the season. But yeah, I think when we're talking about Nottingham Forest and the dangers they possess, and why it's worked so successfully for them this season, is because they didn't have that expectation. It was very similar to when we were good when we finished in the top 6 for the first time a few years ago under David Moyes. We could play that free-flowing counter-attacking football. Teams didn't show us the respect that we probably deserved or needed at that point, and Forest have gone through that similar process where they can just counter-attack. They hit people on the break with the pace of Alanga, Hudson-Odoi, Gibbs-White, as you said, and Elliot Anderson, very good technical players. And Chris Wood, 20 goals this season. He scored 14 goals last season. So this is a striker that's been consistently performing, and also is going to probably consistently perform every time he plays against West Ham. He always seems to score against us, as does every striker in the Premier League when we're talking about them having a purple patch. But yeah, I think that's why it's maybe gone the other way for Forest, because teams are maybe setting up a little bit differently because of the position they are in the league and because of how strong they have been this season. I don't want to say they've been found out. It's just a very different type of game. And it'll be interesting to see what Graham Potter does. And I wanted to ask you, Mike, what you think the best approach for this game is against a team that is so dangerous on the counter-attack and have been so effective at utilising that. Do we almost say, okay, have the ball, break us down, and we're going to do what you do to teams to yourselves with the likes of Kudus and Bowen? Because we know our biggest strength is probably transitional threat as well. So how would you go into it if you're Graham Potter in this game?
Yeah, I think in many ways we almost need to replicate their formation in some ways, because I think Forest will be looking at this. If West Ham go for a back four and they play with, obviously it'd be Todibo and Kilman, they're going to say to Chris Wood, stand on Todibo. He's not as strong in the air as Kilman. Get in there and bully him. We'll play for the seconds. Your objective is just to get in his face and to cause him problems. So with that in mind, I think we then have the question of, do we allow, say, Cresswell to come back into that left-sided centre-back place where he's done quite well when he's played for us in the recent games? Do we do that and then basically say to Kilman, regardless of where Chris Wood goes, you go. Leave the other two to kind of do the covering. You will go where he goes. You will work as a man marker. That is your only objective, is to cover him. So when we are facing those aerial kind of challenges, we have someone who is more physical and perhaps better to mark him. So you can go with the Cresswell route, or the shocking one is you bring in Mavropanos, because again, he's a big, strong unit. You put him in there as well. And I know he is a problem, but again, if we're talking about the physical side, he doesn't often get out-muscled and he doesn't often get beat in the air. So that's the first kind of point of question. I don't think we go for a back four against them. I think that will cause us to have issues. So I do think we have to go with a back three.
Do we start with the same lineup that beat Man United? Because I know we've spoken about this season, trying to continue with momentum off the back of a win. do we continue with what we did at Old Trafford?
I'm on the fence with that because I think you have to bring in Fulkrug. I don't think we can go with our front pairing against Nottingham Forest and then not be asking for problems. They've got big physical defenders, especially Mikalenkovic, absolutely dominant in the air against most players. But if you're going to just have only Kudus and Bowen challenging him, we've either got to go, right, if we hit it long, you two don't challenge. You just let him take the header, and then we'll play, and then we'll fight for the second balls and we'll fight for the scraps, and then we'll try and play from there. If you've got Fulkrug, at least you have someone who's going to make it a bit more of a challenge. He's going to make it a bit more difficult. And as we saw in our last home game, when he was able to drop from the front line and to be then essentially that anchor point and also play as an attack midfielder, he was able then to turn and feed into Kudus, feed into Bowen, who was able then to use their pace, which should be far more difficult for the Nottingham Forest defence to deal with than just having to essentially have it just dealing with a long kind of hit up field, which is what we will do. I'm sorry, we will do that because Forest will at times look to push us a bit higher. They can be quite passive, but I think they'll actually look to push onto us because our frailties this season. But again,
who would you drop if we were going to bring in Fulkrug, Mike? Who would you drop from that midfield three? Because obviously we had Guido that came in, who played really, really well against United. We had Souček playing as more of the advanced midfielder, and then Ward-Prowse sitting at the base alongside Guido. So who comes out of that midfield?
If you're going to drop one of them, it's going to be Guido, isn't it? Yes, he had a good game, but let's be honest, we all know he's leaving. Fulkrug is potentially staying, regardless of what's being said. He's going to stay at this point. But I think of those three, if you're going to drop a midfielder, it is going to be Guido. Me and Sloth have our opinions on James Ward-Prowse. I personally wouldn't play James Ward-Prowse, but that's a conversation for another day. I think it's a well-trodden and well-known path with me and Sloth as to why we wouldn't play him. But Potter likes him. So I think if you're playing that against Forest, yeah, it's awkward because their midfield too are very competitive. They have good strength. They have good pace. Souček has the engine in which to match them and physically can match them. Pace-wise, no, obviously not. And Ward-Prowse, I just worry that if in a 50-50, if he's in with them, they will boss him and dominate. And we saw it with Flynn Downs was just playing with James Ward-Prowse for Southampton. So my main concern is that midfield battle. I think personally we will lose that midfield battle, which is fine if you're able to then exert pressure elsewhere. I think the only way we can win that midfield battle is by having a centre forward and getting the likes of Bowen and Kudus to drop right in to then essentially make a square as such in that middle that allows us then to play around and through that kind of two-player protection that they have. I think that's the only way we can get any kind of dominance in that midfield area. Because let's also not forget they have, Morgan Gibbs-White as well, who's been fantastic for him this year. Incredible engine, doesn't shirk from the defensive side of things. So it's going to be a big battle. And I think the only way we can do that is by replicating some of the stuff we did against Tottenham, where we effectively brought Bowen and Kudus in very tight to Fulkrug, and have them also dropping in, or even Fulkrug drop in to provide an extra pass. But we do need to be very aware that midfield area is going to be a problem, and we are going to have to either go around it, or we're going to have to overload it in the middle by dropping players in and playing very tight and doing that and being very intricate in our play.
Yeah, it'd definitely be interesting to see as well how Forest approach it in the kind of early 5-10 minutes of the game, because they're a team that's averaged less than 40% possession in the Premier League so far this season, which is incredible. You know, when we think about how much we didn't have the ball under David Moyes and how that irritated a lot of the fan base towards the end, the 39% average possession in the Premier League is lower than that by like 4 or 5% from what David Moyes was averaging. So again, it kind of paints the picture as to how little of the ball they do see in matches. But again, with 2 games left to play, and the onus really on Nottingham Forest to win their last 2 games, having given the difficult run of fixtures they've been on. You know, they failed to beat Leicester, they failed to beat Palace, they lost at home to Brentford, they did beat Spurs away, but they lost to Everton at home. They've really those winnable games for them where they're not going into a game as the underdog or being able to just set up as a counter-attacking team. There's teams like Everton, Leicester, they're going to be a little bit more conservative and say, okay, break us down. So I don't think we'll do that. I think we'll continue to play how we have done under Graham Potter. I think we'll try and control possession. We'll try and dictate how we want to move Forest side to side and move them out of position. And yeah, as you said, Mike, I would bring in a striker for this game. I would bring in Fulkirk because we need that focal point in this sort of clash. We're not playing away at Old Trafford. It's a completely different dynamic, and Forest are going to set up in this counter-attacking system that we know have been so successful with this season. And they're going to try and hit us in moments where we've overloaded or, on difficult moments on the break. But a couple of questions. I guess it's been announced that, Cresswell, Kufal, Fabianski, and also Danny Ings as well is going to be leaving. I know Kufal started and Cresswell started at Old Trafford. One player that didn't was Fabianski. Would you be looking to swap the goalie for these last two games, or does sentiment not come into things?
I win the game first and then do it. Why not bring on Fabianski in the last few minutes of the game? We've got 5 subs. Game is again, if Sufal and Cresswell not playing, bring them on towards the end. But play to win first, sentiment later. We're meant to be doing at 2:00, I think. They're asking everyone to get to the ground really early, so they want to do a presentation for the players leaving. Obviously, everyone's only really bothered in 3 of the 4. Sorry, Danny Ings, but that's life. Like I say, sentiment does have its place in football, but it can also be a bit of a killer. Bring them on towards the end. This isn't like it was like Mark Noble's last game, and even that Mark Noble didn't start. He came on for 20, 30 minutes to have his last kind of play on the pitch and to have time with the fans. Same difference. Unless there's specifically part of that kind of plan for the week and being part of that lineup, I wouldn't indulge it any further than that and just be looking at later in the game, just giving them their kind of moment in the sun kind of thing.
Stuff, you agree?
Yeah, I think so. You have to be aiming to win these games, and if there's one thing we know that Forest do, it's they utilise the pace they have, the pace and the physicality. And with all due respect to those players leaving, what they don't have is pace and physicality. And I think it's a bit of a mismatch. Obviously, we want to give them a farewell because we're not going to get a testimonial, but it's one of those things that I would personally just look to bring them in off the bench. If we're 3-0 down at 70 minutes, then you may as well do it. It's probably going to hurt your goal difference, but at least you give the fans something that they can cheer about. But as Mike said, the sentimentality is a difficult thing to try and get into the football match when there's so much money on the line.
Yeah, the last person I wanted to talk about before I get your guys' predictions is Lucas Paqueta. Obviously, he didn't play or feature at Old Trafford. We know what happened in the last home game when he got booked, and the physical distress that we saw on the pitch after that happened. Hasn't featured since. This could potentially be his last game in a West Ham shirt as well, and he's been a very big player for West Ham over the last couple of years. Does he play? Is this another one where it's sentimental, or is it again because he's arguably one of our, if not our best midfielder? So would you play him in this game, or would you keep him on the bench, or does it really depend on how he's feeling in this one? You're on mute, Mike. You're on mute, Mike.
I think just give it to him. Like let him make the decision whether he if he feels he can start. Like he'll probably say yes, but after what happened in the last home game, he probably deserves a break. It's been 2 years of what it is. Obviously, if he's guilty, then the sympathy won't be there. But if he is, as he says, he is innocent, I kind of believe that he is, based on some of the stuff we've seen. I just don't think he's emotionally in the right place. Again, you can use him as a sub, but I probably wouldn't be starting Paqueta for the next 2 games, just because I don't think mentally he's in the right place, and he's had to deal with it for so long, and he knows it's coming to the end. Just let him just let him just be. Like, there's no point putting him in the situation where it could happen again. It's just not fair on him, really, all his teammates. In fairness, I'd say.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as much as we kind of want a resolution to this and we want answers already, and as fans, we want to kind of show our appreciation for what he's done, I do still think that just regardless of whether he's guilty or innocent, you have to be looking after his welfare. And yeah, he's clearly not in the right place to play football. If you're crying over getting a yellow card, like not just crying, like physically he looked overwhelmed. I think if that's the case, then you can't be messing with people like that. And I think as Mike rightly mentioned as well, if he did have another breakdown, any sort of motivation that the rest of the team has is completely up in the air. And it removes that sort of focus that you would want as a manager. So I wouldn't risk him. Maybe I'd bring him on the pitch at half time or whatever if he is mentally fit to be there. But yeah, it's just a shame that I don't think we'll see him in a West Ham shirt.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it's going to be our last home game of the season in the Premier League. I think we've got Ipswich next week away from home. But yeah, this will be the last home game we have to go to at London Stadium this season. Final score predictions for our final home game, guys. What do we think is going to happen in this one?
2-1 sucker punch kick to the dick from Nottingham Forest, I think, to be honest.
Slough?
Yeah, I kind of see them sneaking past us and maybe even 3-1, I'd say to them. I think their pace will pay dividends.
Okay. I'm going to be the positive one of the group and say we're going to draw and extend our unbeaten run to 3 Premier League games. But yeah, I think it's very difficult to call this one because of how much Forest have to play for and how little West Ham have to play for. But again, it'll make for an interesting atmosphere at the London Stadium as well on Sunday afternoon. But yeah, let us know down below in the comments, what are your score predictions for the game in our final home Premier League game of the season against Forest? Do you anticipate us winning, or are we going to lose with the sucker punch, as Mike mentioned as well? Yeah, let us know down below in the comments. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel for more content. And guys, until the next one.
Come on, you eyes.